Just before we begin, silence your phone, please, because you'll ring. Welcome to Coffee and Conversation at the Dunedin Fine Arts Center. We'd like to give a big thank you for the Sterling Society for their continued support, as well as Sarah and John Kissinger for their generous sponsorship. A special thanks also to Steve and Marie Davies, Lane's Lemonade, for providing today's coffee. Their support makes events like this possible, and we're truly grateful. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Denis Gaston. Originally from West Virginia, we've already had that conversation. Denis grew up in Florida and studied art and design at the University of Florida. After working as a graphic designer in Atlanta, he returned to Florida in 1984 to pursue a fine arts full-time degree, as maintaining a studio in Dunedin and Clearwater ever since. Denis creates mixed media paintings and drawings in oil, acrylic, wax, and collage, often inspired by masks and indigenous artwork. His work is known for its imaginative and soulful style, capturing the human spirit in unique ways. Former Tampa Museum Art Director Rollins described Denis as an important Florida artist whose paintings address the human spirit in all of its manifestations. His latest work continues to evolve, incorporating rich textures and new materials, always maintaining a sense of mystery while looking at the loved one through a fractured window. Please help me enjoy Denis Gaston.
Can I sit down? Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll give a little background first. Thanks everybody for coming out, of course. Great to see old friends again. Thanks to the Art Center and the Sterling Center for their asking me to talk again. I think I'll give a little background before I go to the presentation. I guess I've been an artist all my life. I grew up in an artistic family. My father was an artist. My mom, later on, was an artist. Growing up, there was always art magazines around. I think that the art magazines and National Geographic magazines are two early influences for me on giving me my love of art and different cultures that I got a lot of information from, and a lot of joy out of looking at different cultures. And of course, I remember going to the Clearwater Library with my father and getting those big oversized art books and just spending hours going through and looking at art. So, you know, I have a background in it, and I was always dabbling in it. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, I told my father that I wanted to be an artist when I grew up. And he neither discouraged me or encouraged me. He just said that, you know, if you're going to be an artist, you need to take some business courses, because artists are lousy business people. You know, I think some of you can relate to that. So when I decided to go to college, I took commercial art. I decided to kind of split the difference and take commercial art, because my feeling was that I could make a better living doing commercial art. As it turned out, that wasn't the case. It was just as hard to make a living. So I went to junior college, St. Pete Junior College. I was there in '64, I think a couple of years before Jim Hagenbuckle showed up. But then I transferred to the University of Florida and took commercial art. So that was my beginning. And after that, I worked at the Tampa Tribune, the old Tampa Trib, for a year, and then moved to Atlanta, where I got into commercial art. And I was, you know, all during those early years, I was doing other things. I was doing fine art, drawing, and also doing some writing. So, you know, those have all come back in different forms throughout my career. So, my career started, you know, in '84 here in Florida. And I had a presentation all lined up which would have gone from '84 until 2013, but it was a YouTube video, and for some reason I couldn't upload it. It kept disappearing in my computer somewhere, so I went and made another presentation PowerPoint presentation for today, which goes from 2013 until the present. So that's what I'll be showing today, the last 12 years. So, you know, unless there's any questions right now, I'll jump right into the presentation. And, you know, it's a two-way street here. If you have any questions or observations about any of the work, please feel free to jump in at any time. So, there's a soundtrack too. Mixed media piece, acrylic, collage, glue. I love different media. I don't like to tie myself down to one thing. Charcoal, pastel. This was done on a screen door. Yeah, acrylic. Oh, okay, sorry. Screen door, acrylic, drawing. A lot of paint went on there. It really sucked up the paint. This one is sold. That one's available. This is a collage piece. And, you know, it's easy to tell that my influences have been with masks and different cultures. I love masks because they can hide one aspect and project something else. And most of my work, whatever it is, turns out to be a self-portrait. This is ink on BFK Reeves paper. I love lithograph, but I hate the process. It's messy. You never know what's going to happen. So this is done to resemble lithography. It's done with ink and dry brush. The dry brush is you take most of the ink out of the brush, and then you get that effect, that lithography effect. This piece met an untimely demise. It was shown in a gallery, and they determined that it had bugs in the frame. These tiny beetles. They were tiny little beetles that ate paper and wood. And so I tried to fix it, and I never could. And then termites got in it. So I ended up throwing it away. But I do have slides of it, and I do have prints of it. This is the piece that recently sold. My agent sold this piece. She had it in her gallery, her private gallery, for 7 years. And I would say, you know, Allison, do you want me to take that back? And she would say, no, I really like that piece. Just leave it a bit longer. And I said, okay, well, finally, a couple months ago, she came by and she handed me a check. She loves to do that. She loves to surprise her artists, you know, and not tell them that she sold the work and just show up with the money. So that was a surprise.
How big are these?
That one is 17 by 24, something like that.
Is it collage?
This is all acrylic. This one is unusual. When I renovated my house in 2013, I saved all the windows. And this was the windows from my kitchen. And it's done on glass. I had the windows stored for several years, and I was thinking, I don't want to throw those away. You know, what can I do? I'll just paint on them. It was a diptych. Actually, the two glass windows together, so there was a painting on all 4 sides. Yeah. this was the best one. It's spray paint and acrylic and scratching. There's some sgraffito going on in there.
Do you lock it with tape when you spray?
Yeah. This is a piece of ink and acrylic and acetone. I put on the acetone, and when I would put the next layer of paint on, the layer behind it would come up through it. It was a real interesting texture. It's on paper. This piece is in the permanent collection of the Dunedin Museum. It's called Double Cross. And you know, it looks blurred on the slide, but it's not, and that's actually the way it looks because of the acetone and the way it reacts with the paint. Oh. How did that get in there?
It looks so real. That was a super sale.
If you can catch her, this is Cheeto, the outdoor cat. She would love to come in, but the other cat would not allow it. There's a park a couple miles from me called Eagle Lake Park, and there's a primitive area in the southern part of the park, and it's just wonderful. There's all these magnificent oak trees, and my inspiration for this painting comes from one of those oak trees. And it started out, I started on this piece last year, or whenever it was the year of the dragon, and I wanted to have a dragon at the base of the tree. And I did some preliminary drawings of dragons, and it just wasn't working. I couldn't pull it off for some reason. And I worked on it, doing a dragon, and it always looked like a bear or something, you know. So I ended up just doing this.
Why did you want a dragon?
It was the year of the dragon in Chinese philosophy.
Then, before you go on, can you explain your process for the background?
I made a grid. I actually drew it out and just colored in the squares with layers of color.
Is that acrylic?
Yeah, it's acrylic.
All of it?
Yeah, all of it. This was a very time-consuming piece for me. I got frustrated a lot doing it because a lot of times I have no idea what I'm doing, and it's like I learned by doing it. And when I did the leaves, for instance, they weren't showing up at all, and so I had to go over them 2 or 3 times. I had to outline them a couple of times before they would stand out. So there are layers and layers of colors throughout this whole piece. And it was only at the end, the tree itself was not standing out, so I went back with graphite and gave it some body, made shadows on, I usually, when I start a piece, I ask myself, what direction is the light coming from? So I always figure that out, and then I react accordingly, So on this piece, the light was coming from the right, so I made the left branches darker to make it stand out more. This is a large piece. It's 48 by 60. Another mixed media piece. Just I either when I start out with a blank canvas, I think, well, be something figurative. It may be a mask image. It may be, I don't know, I don't do a lot of preliminary drawings. When I was in commercial art, I would get a problem, working with a client, and they would tell me what they wanted. And I would start out thinking of, I'd do preliminary sketches and ideas, and I would show it to them, and then I would get an okay to proceed with it. And then it was just the process of completing what my idea was. And I would, finish the piece and give it to them, and that was that. When I tried that way of working, making art, it never worked out like that. And I was always getting frustrated because I would have the artwork completed in my mind, and then when I would start painting, it always changed. It would never be what I thought it should be. And it was very frustrating. And I remember tearing up a piece of artwork because I got so frustrated with it. It wasn't doing what I imagined it would do. So I had to promise myself never to tear up the artwork again. I had to teach myself when I got blocked or when I got frustrated, when it wasn't working, just to walk away from it. And if I could do that, I would come back later on, a day, a week, a month, and I would see the artwork in a different light. And I would see what was going wrong or what was right. And it worked out that way. And I've used that. I hardly ever do preliminary work anymore. I do sketch work. That work, get out of there. This work was different. I did preliminary drawings. I would go to the park and take photographs of the tree. So, in that respect, that was why it was a lot more difficult for me. But I was okay with the way it turned out.
Do you use a limited palette?
I try to use primary colors and shades of those primary colors, plus white and black.
Do you use heavy body, soft body?
Yeah, both. Sometimes I'll paint with heavy body gesso and then paint over top of that. The one I'm working on right now has, I don't know what's in it. It's got sand and heavy body gesso. Someone gave me the canvases, so that's what I'm working on right now. I've painted on tar paper, screens, anything, whatever inspired me.
Dennis, are you inspired by real people that you see, or are these fictional people, or?
I am inspired by real people too, but when I paint them, they change. And I'm also inspired by things I see, things I hear, dreams. I'm really intrigued by different cultures. That's why, those early geographics that I saw were just fascinating to me. And early on, I wanted to be what is the field of study where you study different cultures? Ethnology? Yeah, that.
Anthropology.
Not anthropology.
Ethnology.
Ethnology, yeah. But I never got into that. I also wanted to do big game photography, travel around the world photographing animals. I never got into that either.
What do you want?
Here's another one of those lithographic pieces that aren't really lithography. They're just dry brush ink drawings on Reeves paper. Yeah, this is called the Cowboy's Tincture. And lately I've been going into a lot of that one over top of the other, to give a kind of an optical blending. I never really learned how to do realistic blending of colors. I never did that in college. So I just kind of developed my own style. I guess you would call it the Seurat style. I'm sorry about the colors. These colors are a lot brighter. I'm told that it's the projector. This is another painting on drawing on reeds. Just spontaneous, I just start out making marks, and it's called the portal. This is called a boy with crustacean cap. This is a large piece, 48 by 48. And I realized after when I did put this slide that it's changed. It's not like this at all. It's a lot more detail now. And it's got more detail in the figure.
Would you paint little white, like a wash over?
That figure is called resistance. There is a kind of paint that I don't exactly know how it's processed, but when you shine light on it, it glows. And it's kind of transparent too. And it comes in resistance blue, resistance red, orange.
Did you buy it? Or did
Yeah.
someone give it to you?
Well, no, it was given to me, but you can buy it too. Years ago, an art store went out of business at Countryside Mall, and I bought a ream of BFK Reeves paper, and I decided I'm going to start doing Oriental brush painting. I had this paper laying around my studio, and I thought, well, I better use it. And I'll do some brush paintings. And I thought, how hard can that be? Well, I found out very quickly how difficult it is. For every 10 drawings I did, maybe one was good. And I saw a documentary on Japanese artists and brush painters, and they worked at it for all their lives, and they felt by the time they were in their 70s they were pretty good. And they had apprentices who would come in, and they couldn't even touch ink to paper. And they would first start out cleaning out the master's studio, and then they would clean up, arrange his brushes and paper. After a couple of years, he would start teaching them how to draw and paint. Well, I didn't have any of that training. I thought, well, I can just jump right in and do it. And this was one of, after about 30 or 40 drawings, this was one that I liked and kept. And later on, some of the ones that I didn't make the cut, I went back and started adding paint to them, and they turned out better after that. This is an odd painting I did several years ago called I forgot what it was. What is it when you go? Here's a diptych I did last year. Paper, wax, collage. Oh. How This is called Wonder Woman. Somebody once told me, you don't do a lot of women. How come you don't do women? And I didn't know. Maybe I think it was because a lot of the artwork that I do is tough, you know, and strange and weird, and mask. And I was drawn to that. And most of that is not feminine, but there is a feminine side to making art, I think. And I thought I took that as a challenge, you know, to do more feminine art, to do more female art. And this is one of them. It's a collage. It's all paper. Holes punched in it included. It's got wax on it.
What did you do with the squiggles? Is that paint or is that?
Yeah, that's all acrylic paint. Several times. You know, a lot of times when you put paint over different colors, the first layer, you know, it's not enough paint on there. So you have to do, I had to do 2 or 3 layers to get it to the solid color.
And then you added the red on top.
Yes. And the red is like several different times that I had to paint over it. This is called Up From Earth. You know, that rust color in the middle, someone told me there's a kind of paint that it comes in 2 different parts, and you add them together and paint it on there, and over time it turns to rust. The same texture, the same feel, the same look of rust. So that's actually collage. And when I didn't do it right. It didn't turn out the way I wanted, so I cut it out and made a collage of it.
Do you paint an entire background and then work, because your whites are very bright?
I do the background. I think it's it might be collage. I think that white part is collage.
A lot of paper that you make yourself?
Yeah, I cut that out of piece of sack, I think. You know.
Really?
Yeah. But I do it both ways. I do the whole background, and then I also paint around the figure some. Mixed media, the face and head are mostly graphite. Everything else is just done in different colors. This is done on an 8x8 canvas board, wax and acrylic and charcoal.
What title would you give? You're not mentioning your titles. I'm just wondering, do you think titles are important?
For me, they are, yeah. But I'm not,
What's the title of this one? You don't know.
no.
There you go.
Sometimes I come up with titles first, and sometimes afterwards. Sometimes other people give me the name for pieces. Is that the way you work?
No, I think titles are important, and I give them afterwards.
Yeah, yeah.
Not before.
But you always know what you're painting right before.
No.
No. That's the way I am. I never know.
What would you call that one?
It's called Ruby's Dance. It's from a The title is from a Jethro Tull record. I think Ruby was a Hindu goddess. Here she is dancing over a dead figure.
Story there.
This is called Genie. G-E-N-I-E. This one is in my studio. It's for sale. This was the background, and a lot of it was done with a sponge. Artist sponge, you know, you get your color and you layers and layers of color.
Is there a title to that one? Come on, I'm giving you trouble.
I forget the title. Jim, do you know the title?
It has to do with photos, the artist.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Photos, I think. Or there's another one for photos.
Something about totems. This is in the collection of Tim and Tim Hickelbuckle. You'll have to go to their house and see it. Turn it over and find out the title.
So the titles are not that important to you.
They are, but my memories,
So keep the inventory, we do that like this,
yeah,
of what you've sold, where things are.
yeah. This is another one of the Wonder Woman, Warrior Woman pieces I did. Oh, dang.
That's the current one, right? That's your
There's a
current,
conspiracy going on here.
that's the current cat, right?
This is the indoor cat, Pixel. She would not allow the other one inside.
The cat's eyes look like the people's eyes, right? Same
Yeah.
shape.
I got a round tabletop from Home Depot. I was going to make a table. I never made the table, but I made a painting on it. 24 diameter, 24 inches.
So it's wood.
Yeah, on wood, yeah. It's called The God of Green Things, but there's nothing green in it. Well, the eyes are kind of green. This is an interesting piece. It's there was a volcano in Indonesia called Krakatoa, and in the 1890s it exploded and it was huge. It was felt around the world. I mean, there was a plume of dust that blocked out the sun all over the place. And I don't know if you remember Edvard Munch's The Scream. Well, that weird color in the sky, they speculate that that's what he actually saw. It was the smoke from Krakatoa that actually caused the sky to be like that. Well, I must have been reading it at the time when I did this painting, because this is called Leaping Krakatoa. And it's done with mixed media, wax and spray glue, and I built up the surface, paper mache, and it was in my studio for a long time. And then there was a terrible studio fire in 2007, and everything was destroyed. And the fire department of Dunedin came in and they said, "Well, you have an hour to go in and salvage what you can, and then we're going to pull down the walls and you won't be able to get took it outside and it had smoke damage on it, and the back was charred. And I thought, well, I'll keep it, as a reminder. And I kept it for about a year, and I decided that I needed to renovate it or fix it up. So I did some editing and cleaned it up and painted over it. And last year I had a show at Articles Gallery in St. Petersburg. And I was coming up short on an art show, and I thought, I need to show this piece. So I did show it. And when you think about it, it could be seen as a transformative piece, coming through fire, leaping Krakatoa. In metalworking, there's a process called annealing, where if you're making a sword or making something, you put it in the fire repeatedly, and you put it in water, and then you heat it up again, and you put it in water. That whole process of annealing ultimately makes the metal, the sword, whatever it is, that much stronger. So for me, and I think the artists who were in that terrible fire, that made us stronger, ultimately. That someone said that the fire destroyed our art, but it made our spirit stronger to create more work. So that's what I took away from that. This was a piece that was in the show here. It actually came from a sketch of a heart tree. And as I worked on it changed, as they often do, and it became a person. It's called Miracle Catcher. And this is a small work of 8x8 on canvas, board, wax, charcoal, acrylic, graffito. Those white lines around it are actually, I think it was a nail that went back into the wax. Get that nice effect. Same thing here. This has got wax on it. What I would do, I had these little wax beads that I got in the craft store, and I just put them all over it. Then I got a piece of wax paper and put over it, and got an iron and just went over it. And the wax just went everywhere. I used beeswax a lot previous to this, and I loved it because you never know what you're going to get. It's hard to control wax when it starts melting. The first time I used it, I had my studio doors and windows open, and bees flew into my studio. They wanted to know what was going on.
Now, is that paint underneath it acrylic, or what?
Yes.
Okay, so.
Yeah.
So it didn't meld into each other, it's a layer on top.
Right. I don't do it the traditional way of wax.
And caustic, yeah.
In caustic, I don't do it that way. I just layer the wax and then put the color on top of that, and then more wax. What I love about the wax is as it starts cooling, it starts getting granulated. It changes texture, and I would put the wax on, right up to the time that it got hard again. And I love the texture, the granulated texture.
Dennis, do you work? I'm trying to think of what you've shown so far. It's always been a face. Do you work with any other subject matter?
Not really. Most of my stuff is figurative in some way, abstract figurative. Yeah. Faces, yeah. Yeah, more face. I think it's something about the mask images that I've seen so much that I've been drawn to. For me, that's the most important part. You know, it may be that I found it harder to do the whole figure. I never did figure studies in college. This is a piece that one of the last works, big last works that I did. When I was doing the one of the tree, you know, with all the leaves, right behind me in my studio was this canvas, a white canvas, and I would get so frustrated doing those little leaves, and I'm thinking, damn, I don't want to do this anymore. And this blank canvas was behind me, and I had such an urge to just turn around and attack this canvas, you know, like just with pain, you know, just attack it. And I couldn't do it because I had, the way I work is I have to complete one before I start another. So this sat there behind me for weeks. Finally, I finished the other one, and I started on this. And at the same time I was started on this, I was looking at artwork, and I was admiring the work of Jean Dubuffet. He created Art Brut. He didn't really create it, but he started it. Famous Swiss French artist. I love his figurative work. He was all about the immediacy of art, you know, and how the rawness of it. The Art Brut was all about, you know, not thinking about work. It's what you see is what you get. Putting it right on the canvas, putting it out there. I wanted, you know, he did a piece similar to this, and I wanted to do something like that where it would be figurative, the face, where we all work together, you know, more or less a continuous line work. And as I progressed on this piece, I began to see how important the negative part of this is, what might be called experiential space became as important as the images themselves and how it works together in the composition. It's called Scarlet Meander. And it was a meander with me, how the brush just went from one figure to the other, and where I should add more, you know, more lines, where I should stop, where I should add more to it. Yeah. And it's done with the scarlet color is more liquid. It's in a jar. It's not tube paint at all. The only way I could have done it was with more liquid paint. That's 48 by 60.
It's about that size, right? It's about that size, isn't it?
48 by 60. That's it. What time is it?
Quarter to.
Anybody have any questions?
We could see your laptop. On your laptop, we could see that it was much brighter. The pictures were much, much brighter on the laptop. So we were looking at both the big screen and the laptop.
Oh, you saw it on there?
Yep. Yeah.
Well, I apologize for the errors.
Dennis, have you created anywhere a repository where people who have your artwork can send photos
photos? I mean, if you don't have photos of them, so that there's a place where someone can actually see the sum total of your work that still exists on the planet.
I have a website that I have my artwork on Artwork Archive, but it's not complete. It's in the process of all my work for the
Have you
past.
put a call out for people who have pieces that maybe you don't have photographs of?
I have not done that.
Would you do that, please?
Yeah. I can do that.
Set a collector.
Yeah, you know, unfortunately, in the fire, a lot of those contacts, you know, names and telephone numbers were lost. So, I mean, I have almost 4,000 pieces of artwork that were done. I don't have images of all of them.
But you have an archive, a handwritten, I mean, you have a
Yeah.
ledger.
It's always important.
We could maybe put it out on one of those signs that are on the freeway that say
Call this number.
Lost Denis Gaston pieces all.
She'd be the great person to hold that sign. She would do that for you. You would take a charge.
Any other questions? Karen Walker.
Hi.
Hi.
Just a comment, I so much enjoyed the exhibit most recently here at the Art Center, and went back 2 or 3 times to look at it, and it was so wonderful to see sort of, you know, different periods, different styles, different impulses, whatever. And then being jealous of other people's collection, you know, that wasn't on our wall. But the thing that I was absolutely in lust for, honestly, it was that base, was the sketchbook. And I came back 2 or 3 times just to have my own personal space with your sketchbook. And it was so interesting to me because every image and every day's work, and I didn't know, okay, is this a day in the life of Denis Gaston on this page? But they were at once, had similar vibes, of course, in the sketchbooks, but not the kind of work that I've seen you do as a finished piece. You know, even the faces and the shapes and the choices and the lines, in many cases, were not the ones that I've seen on your canvas. And so how does, and then sometimes I look at things and I'm thinking, man, that must have been an interesting dream, you know? Because there's a character there.
There were a couple of the images in that sketchbook that made it into paintings, but not usually. That's the only sketchbook I've ever done.
Really?
Yeah.
I was hoping you had this chronological collection, you know?
You know, I've never done that really.
Oh my gosh.
I have done sketches on pieces of paper, but never
Right.
a combination like Joan or Stephen Schatz or Jack Barrett. They are masters of sketchbooks.
Well, oh my gosh, I just assumed that was, you know, your way of working, and in our house, they end up on little scraps of paper too. But, you know, I've always, in gifting, sketchbooks doesn't work to make the process change. But
I think I have a sketchbook in my head.
yeah,
There are images there all the time that I can draw on.
but that's just a treasure.
Yeah.
That book
You
is
know,
a treasure.
if we have time, we have a few minutes, I'll tell you a story about that sketchbook. Several years ago, a friend asked me to take her to Moffitt Cancer Center. She was doing some cancer treatment over there, and she wanted me to drive her, bring her back. So I knew I was going to be there for a while, so I took my sketchbook and some illustrator pens while she was in for her treatment, and I would sketch. And we got there, and there was a big waiting room, and there was all kinds of people there waiting, and mostly older folks, you know. And I was sitting there waiting for her, and in the corner in the back was a younger couple, and their 2 children. started talking, and I was wondering to myself, why are they here, I mean, is it their abuela who is getting cancer treatment, perhaps? And after a while, the nurse came out and called to them, and it was the father who got up and went inside. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, he must be the one getting the cancer treatment. So, after a while, I started sketching in my book. There's nothing to do but wait, so I started sketching. And the boy and the girl were on their iPad, doing stuff on that. And after a while, the girl looks up and she sees me, in my drawing in my sketchbook. And that gets her attention. And she taps on the shoulder of her brother, and he looks and he sees me drawing. And so they put down their iPad and they're watching me draw. And after a while, they both get up and they come over and they sit right up opposite me in chairs, and they're looking at me drawing, and so they were really interested in what I was doing. So after a while, I got kind of hungry, and I thought, well, I'm going to go to the cafe and get something to eat. And then something stopped me, and I thought, well, hold on a minute here. And I asked them, I said, I held up my sketchbook and I said, would you like to look at it? And the girl said, yeah. Her English was not so good, but the boy, the younger boy, he could speak English pretty well. He said, yes, we would like to. So I gave them the sketchbook, and they started looking at it, and their eyes got big, and they were like going through the whole thing, and they were just like pointing at it and laughing, and looking at it. And they held it up for their mom, she was sitting in the back, and held it up for her. And it was just very moving experience. And so we started talking, and they opened up to me, and they were asking me questions about, did I go to college, did I have training, and they told me that their uncle was an artist back in Puerto Rico, and there was this connection. And so after a while, they asked me if they could show their mom, and so I said, sure, of course, and they took the book back and showed it to their mom, and finally, the mom was, I got the courage to ask her questions, and, I said, is your husband okay? And the boy translated, and she said something to him, and he said, well, he's got cancer. And I didn't know. I said, I kind of pointed my head, and she said, yeah, it was like brain cancer. So I said, this is a great place. He's in the right place. Everything's going to be okay. So finally, later on, the father came out, and he was sitting with his family, and they were showing him the sketchbook, pointing to it, laughing, and pointing to me. And so a little bit after that, they collected all their things, and it was time for them to go home. And I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, I've got to say something to this people. What can I say? What do you say? Could I give them encouragement? And what would be my final words to them? So they all came, and they were filing past me, and the little boy, Javier, I think his name was, he handed me this was at Christmas time, he handed me a sugar cane and said, Merry Christmas. And his sister passed by, and she said, Merry Christmas. And the father and his wife came by, and the last thing they said was Merry Christmas to me. That was the last I ever saw of them. So it was a very moving experience. And it was an example of how art can, bring people together. You can communicate through art feelings. So it was a very poignant thing.
Thank you.